Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's 2-Minute Warning feature interview, where we take a deeper dive into this push that we're seeing across the energy sector towards decarbonization, net zero goals, and sustainability. Hoping to uncover some intelligence that would help our stakeholders navigate somewhat of a bumpy road ahead towards implementation. It's 2 minutes to midnight, and I'm joined here today with our featured guest speaker, Madhav Dar, the co-founder and chief operating officer of Zazen Properties. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to kick off from your perspective, the overall role that you see property developers playing, of course, in this energy transition, in this drive towards net zero and decarbonization. Where do you see them leading the way, essentially?
So the property development sector in general, globally, accounts for about close to 40% of carbon emissions, and that's mainly from urban cities. So the role that property developers and the entire life cycle or entire value chain within construction and property development, the role that they can play to reduce such carbon emissions and sort of take small steps towards that net zero commitment is huge. And it's mainly because of the amount of materials and the amount of energy consumption that goes into creating these, urban cities. I've read information or articles where it said that 60% of the world's population will be living in urban cities by 2030. 60%. Right? Which basically means that over the next 10 decades, so, obviously the 60% will move in, but you have to still keep constructing for them to have places to live. And that basically means 2.5 trillion square feet of development that has to take place over the next 30, 40 years. That's like building, a small New York City every month, right? So that's the kind of development that is underway in the world. Forget UAE. UAE, obviously, you've seen tremendous growth in the last 50 years. It's unprecedented. And we need to be a showcase, not only for the region, but for the rest of the world. And that's because we've got the right leadership who can implement strategies quickly and effectively and sort of, force people to adopt them without too much, arguing and senates and bill passing. So we need to be sort of a guiding light in this regard.
So just talking on the UAE, as you mentioned, it has been touted for its massive development in sustainability over the past few years. Of course, the net zero target that was launched for 2050, the first major oil and gas producing country to announce it. From the green development side, of course, from the properties perspective, what do you think has been done in the UAE that's created that environment that has allowed for this success and this acceleration? Where do you think that those best practices can be applied elsewhere in the region?
So there are two reasons why the UAE has sort of become the leader in this. The first one being that, of course, there's so much construction. The way that the government over the last 2 years managed the pandemic, obviously opened Dubai and UAE up to the world. People realize it's not just a place you go to party for 5 days and go back home. They realize that with the infrastructure, with the support of the government, it's somewhere where you want to live. And obviously the recent golden visa changes, etc., have only spurred the growth, right? I heard on the news yesterday, in fact, that there are over 3.5 million people already residing full-time in Dubai, 3.5 million. And that is going to increase by about 3 or 4% over the next few years. So, of course, the government is very far-reaching. They think ahead. They understand that, look, we're going to have a big construction boom coming up, and we need to hit our goals of the net zero. We need to have best practices in place. And the first step, I believe, that's required, and I've mentioned this before in other interviews that I've done, is education, right? People, yes, end users have more access to information online, so they're more eco-conscious, especially the younger generation coming out of schools and colleges. So when they get into the earning population, they will want this type of product when it comes to how they live, apart from everything else. So developers have to plan for that from now. They need to start implementing strategies from now. And that means the government has to step in and educate people. They need to educate, the old, large family holdings who own, 100 buildings in Dubai, right? And they need to help them retrofit. They subsidize it, they pay for it and take it back later, the ESCO sort of setup. And that is just one step, right? Education, but is the most important step. Because once people realize that building sustainability isn't a cost, it is a value enhancement, right? That's the biggest shift in your mindset. You need to understand that you're enhancing not only the environment, but you're enhancing how people live psychologically, how they live and breathe and interact with each other. So I think education is the first best practice that needs to be put into place. Of course, apart from that, with technology and materials evolving, on a yearly basis, there's always new methods and always new materials that can be used. Specifically in this region, of course, the challenge about getting more sustainable materials is harder. It's readily available in Europe. You've got huge forests, but to cut it, manage it, produce it, and then ship it has its own, cost.
Right.
And it has its own negative environmental impact. So that has to be taken into consideration. That will evolve as these goals are set and as education comes more into the forefront and as government supports sustainable development, whether it's from the contractor side, from the material procurement side, or even from the developer side, all these things will sort of balance out. But it takes time, right? The challenge is how will it proliferate through all the developers, through the large, and I'm not going to take names, but the large government-backed developers, right? Because who's checking them? My research, and I stay in tune with the market every quarter, and I do my own research. There are 8,000 villas that are going to be handed over in Dubai in 2025 in the first quarter. Wow. 8,000 villas, and that's everything that's been launched in the last year, basically, right? And that's if there's no new launches as of today, right? 8,000 villas, forget the number of apartments are even more. So is there a body that is sort of overseeing this, making sure that, okay, at least the new developments should be aligned and have a sustainable component to it? Yes, there are already minimum sustainable regulations in place, which is a great first step. But then the challenging part is implementing it.
And implementing or implementation, it requires collaboration, right? You mentioned so many stakeholder groups right there. Where do you see collaboration and partnerships playing a role? Is that accelerating, or is there still many organizations working in silos across that stakeholder group?
I think it will happen, right? Because, the whole focus was on Expo. Now that Expo has ended, the next focus will be on COP28, which is, I think, 2 years away. And I think typically of Dubai, we'll stretch it to the end, but we'll get it done. And UAE in general. So I think that, yes, collaboration will get better. There's no choice, because the only way to reach the lofty goals that have been set is to have the entire life cycle and every single stakeholder in that life cycle held accountable. You can't expect the biggest developer in Dubai to continue building without having anything sustainable part of the development, right?
Yeah.
It's not possible, because they deliver tens of thousands of units every year. For me, for example, we have delivered 86 units, but we knew from the start that we wanted to focus on, the community angle, the sustainability angle, and the design, space, and amenities angle. We wanted to give all of those things to the mid-market consumer, right? Which meant that, yes, it's going to cost me more to be sustainable, but I can't really up the value of my product because it's for the mid-market consumer.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that. You know, you mentioned education. Of course, a big part of this process is managing people, planet, and profit and costs, right? From the end user side, where do you see that demand for sustainability at the moment? Are people willing to essentially overcome, the challenge of cost to understand, as you said, the value added to having a healthier lifestyle? Or, for example, I've lived in Dubai for about 10 years now. It always seems that people are going towards the more competitive cost aspect, regardless of sustainability.
Yes, so you're absolutely right. Now, it's a difficult question. So let me break it down into two parts. From the developer's perspective, you need to be able to balance sustainability, cost, design, facilities, right? These are not easy to balance because at the end of the day, your price point is relatively fixed, unless you've been lucky to be on the Palm the last year and you can charge, 2,000 dirhams a square foot. So that's the challenge from the developer side, right? You need to be sure that what you are creating meets all these standards. Now, from the end user side or from the buyer or the investor side, money matters, right? This inflation is rampant right now. Every single penny that you've earned is close to your chest. You've got kids' education, you've got probably a mortgage to pay off, a car loan to pay off. So of course you're going to go for what's the best value. Now, once you start educating the end user, and I'm not talking about the younger generation, they're already being educated, but I'm talking about, if you're 35 plus and now you're able to afford your own home, you need to educate that sort of segment, 35 to 65 sort of segment, and explain to them that, look, yes, once you invest in a sustainable house, whether it's an apartment or a villa, you know that your operation costs are going to be probably 10 to 15% lower. You know that your maintenance costs are probably going to be 20% lower over time. So that upfront cost that you may pay is justified, right? And it's about a mindset. It's a mindset. Of course, the government has to play a huge role here because they need to step in and say, okay, if you are buying a sustainable house, then maybe you get 90% mortgage, not 80. Or maybe you don't have to pay any fees or something, something along those lines to subsidize and encourage investment into sustainable developments. And that in turn will make more developers try to mix right and bring products to the market that actually cater to these sort of things.
Do you see, of course, there's that side of the equation and cost, but you mentioned the material side, the entire value chain. I imagine technology is always considered, accelerating, lowering costs as well, from the input side of things. Are you seeing that trend happening? And do you think that's going to be crucial in the midterm?
Yeah, look, it's already happening. I believe that UAE and generally the region is playing catch up, obviously, to Europe. And that's two main reasons. Firstly, obviously, we'll do the material side of it first. Materials like, and I'm just going to throw out names here, people might not understand it, but you have cross-laminated timber, glue lam, recyclable plastic. These sort of materials are readily available in Europe, right? The logistics of cutting it and bringing it to where you want to build it is nothing, it's negligible. How it reacts to the weather there's enough studies on it, but that hasn't been done here. So for example, if I want to use cross-laminated timber in my building, there are no regulations for it, right? So that's the first step. People need to understand that it's safe to use. If I construct a building right now, even if it's a G+4 building, right, using just CLT, the end user has no idea. They're going to walk in and say, it's made of wood, oh no, fire. No, thank you. They'll walk out. So they don't know about it. They don't understand it. And that's not their fault, right? You have to educate people constantly on this. So the material side, there's a lot of really cool material that can be used. And, for our next project, we're trying to implement some of it, not in the entire building, but in bits and pieces where we can get away with it with the current regulations. And we're using that as an example to everyone here, saying that, look, it can be done and it will last. So the project after that, maybe we use it a little more, hopefully more regulations come in, and then the entire industry starts using it. Now, in terms of actually procuring this, that's a challenge logistically. There'll have to be a lot of subsidies for this. In terms of technology, obviously there is BIM, which is widely used already, but now they've got sort of 3D and 4D BIM, where every single stakeholder just in the contracting side of it can give their inputs at the design stage so that there's less material wastage, less resource usage. You can visualize and see how things are done. A big shift will also come into and move towards prefabrication. So basically it's like, instead of thinking of it as a construction site, you think of it as a product, right? So Apple will optimize how they make their product in the lab, and then they will send it to production. Similarly, if you can optimize your building in the design phase and understand that, okay, I can make these walls prefabricated, cut out, everything done in a workshop, and then just move it to site and put it up, it's much easier. Less energy use at site, less use of material waste, etc., what I've mentioned. So I think there'll be a big shift towards that as well. And these are sort of not new, but they've been there in Europe, but they're going to come to the forefront now, especially between UAE and Saudi as the growth continues.
Just on that Apple comment, Apple, with their iPhones, you can also buy refurbished iPhones. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, even since I've been here in Dubai, for example, there's buildings that have been going up every year, every week. Is there a market that to re-enhance the current infrastructure to make it more sustainable at the moment?
Yes, so there is, so in Abu Dhabi, there is a Super ESCO, which is a sort of an energy saving organization. And globally, especially I believe in Australia, they're the sort of pioneers in this, where companies come in and they retrofit your building only in terms of energy efficiency, and that's mainly through the AC systems and the lighting systems, and making sure that it's efficient or up to standards or up to spec, current spec. And they come in, they make the initial investment, and then you as a building owner pay them back on the savings that you make from your energy spend every year annually. So it's a long-term play. I mean, you invest and you get your return over 10 years. And and I believe that the government has sort of centralized the Super ESCO part of it. There are individual companies that provide regular ESCO services. But again, as a building owner, where you've already spent on the construction and the operations of the building, it's difficult to get you to spend, an extra $1 million or $2 million, depending on the size of your building, and understand the benefits of that. Now, for example, in our first project in Jumeirah Village Triangle, which is Zazen 1, we are a sustainable building. We are their keys certified. That means that from the design phase, we knew that we wanted to be sustainable. We challenged our contractor to source materials accordingly. And we ourselves have put in, apart from being sustainable, apart from the certification, we put in solar panels as well, because we knew that that would reduce the building's energy consumption by about 25 to 30% annually. And we pass that on to end users in the form of lower service charges. So again, it's the mindset, right? How are you getting into developing what you want to develop? It has to come from the concept of it.
You have to get out in front of it instead of dealing with it in the moment right now. Just touching on that project, or Zazen projects overall, of course, sustainability encompasses a lot of things, but the biggest thing is creating a healthier future and livability. For your sustainable projects, what are the key components of that livability aspect?
Sure, it's a great question. So within the development, when we launched the company in 2018, as I mentioned, we wanted sustainability and community to be a major part of what we did. And those two, for me, sort of go hand in hand, right? I've been fortunate enough to grow up in 4 or 5 different countries in my life, and I've seen how communities in Europe or North America or Canada specifically, how they sort of integrate with each other and how they communicate with each other and how they play off each other. And I'm not talking about people, I'm just talking about the general environment. And we wanted to bring a piece of that here. Now, within our project, obviously being sustainable, we've got three main things: energy efficiency, water efficiency or water usage efficiency, and the general livability factor of reducing as much energy consumption as you can. Now, within our project, through efficient irrigation systems, we've reduced about 33% of the water consumption. With our efficient FAH,
which is huge. Water is a massive critical
it's
issue.
Massive, especially here. And to that point, we have in our project 41,000 square feet of landscaping, right? 41,000 square feet, that's not small. So we wanted to bring that environment where
the real plants, right? Not plastic plants.
Yes, all real plants. And the plants have been chosen. I know. And the plants have been chosen based on what absorbs the most carbon dioxide, right? So we've gone into those sort of details. Our low flow, our sort of motion sensor lights, our efficient AC systems, all of those contribute to a further 20% reduction in energy cost. I'm not even getting to the solar part of it, which is a further 25% reduction. And we make sure even the material that we use, so for example, the glazing in our building, right? It's of low U value. What that basically means is that it absorbs less heat, which helps the building be cooler. Similarly, our tiles that we use on the open surfaces or the hard surfaces, as they're called, have high SRI values, which basically means it reflects more heat, again, reducing what the heat in the building. So with all of this, we've managed to, we hope to rather reduce about 440 metric tons of carbon emissions annually, right? And I think that's a big step. Of course, can we be better? Yes. But again, it comes down to balancing sustainability with costs and how you sell. So I think we've done well. Are there areas we can improve? Of course there are. But we believe that as we build and as regulations improve and as subsidies come in and as support basically improves, not just me, there'll be other developers who will be able to do it better than we can probably. And again, remember, building sustainably, for commercial enterprises is easier than building for residential enterprises, because commercial enterprises, you sell to an organization that has better cash flow, larger sort of volume. An individual, you're going to come in and buy an apartment for 1 million dirhams or 1.5 million dirhams. You're going to worry about every single dirham over there, so you need to really be able to balance that well.
Just talking on that finance side of things, we had another discussion last week with some stakeholders about how green finance hit its highest level ever last year. But then the follow-up comment was, we're going to have to hit record levels every year moving forward to even come close to reaching our targets, or our low carbon targets. How are you seeing the financial aspects of this sector play out? Is it accelerating? Is there still challenges? What can be done to bring further investment into the space?
I mean, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but again, it's going to boil down to
education.
Yeah. But education, not from someone like me. It has to come from the top, right? Okay. No one really cares. I mean, okay, you care about me for the next 30 minutes, but for long term, the government has to step in, and it's got to be education with subsidies. It cannot just be education alone, because you have to give people an incentive to start thinking this way, to start building this way, to start buying this way, right? You have to. Especially with the lofty targets. And look, to be honest, I've always understood that if any place can do it, it's the UAE, right? That's always been my mindset. And we've seen that proved over and over again. But to reach our goals, we will have to find other ways to offset, right? And you know what those ways are, carbon credits, etc.
Yeah.
Those have to come in. There's no other way to reach our goals. Of course, the development industry in the UAE, because of what I'd mentioned, 40% of global emissions, they even use about 35% of energy consumption globally is from operations of buildings and construction of buildings. So that impact is huge. So, I mean, if they focus on improving and optimizing how this industry works, the finance side will come in. Now, super ESCO projects, for example, a lot of finance will pour into that, okay? Because I believe that the government is going to step in and make it a mandate for buildings to reach a certain level of, energy consumption or negative carbon emission, et cetera, over the next 5 years. And I think a lot of finance will move into that area. From an end user perspective, currently in our project, we are about 80% sold. And we get a lot of calls from banks, who say, okay, you're green building certified, great. We're willing to give, a better mortgage rate or more of a, LTV ratio. But again, I think, government needs to step in and encourage banks to do that more, right? As financing comes in from both sides at the investment level and at the lending level, again, there'll be more demand, more growth, and more products that are delivered.
Yeah, I think the banks are starting to get there, but it needs to be accelerated. They have strategies, implementation again.
Unfortunately, the local banks don't have it. It's more the global banks with local presence that sort of do it.
HSBC, Standard Chartered, yeah.
Yes, exactly. But their standards are very high, right? Because right now they're risk averse. So they may come and say only if it's LEED gold. I mean, come on, everyone can't be LEED gold. It just doesn't make sense, right? So they need to manage those expectations internally and give products that are more conducive, for people to take them up.
Well, it seems like 20 minutes goes by pretty quickly, so we have to wrap up. But I just wanted to get one last question. And COP27, everyone is accelerating across the board, multiple industries implementing initiatives leading up to the massive congregation, of course, with the agenda soon to be released for it. What is your outlook for the short term, for the rest of the year ahead? What are you looking out for in this sector?
I have seen the recent launches that have happened in Dubai specifically. I'm talking about real estate, because that's what I know about. Now, there are a lot of new developments that have tried to bring in, a lot of beachside living and waterfront living and, all of those things. None of these people have said sustainable living yet, right? None of them have said that we are going to build consciously. So I believe that over the next year, we need to ramp up and put in place regulation that forces such developments to have some level of sustainability. Yes, it is currently there already for certain areas. So within Dubai, there are 3 or 4 main authorities that manage development based on where your plot of land is. So I think all of them need to be aligned. And I think all of them need to have a single code when it comes to sustainability, which I believe is already in the works. And once that's in place, they need to then step up and support the logistics side of it so that procurement of sustainable materials is also brought in line with the development cycle. And materials like cross-laminated timber that I mentioned, those need to be readily available and tested and tried. So I think in the short term, from the development side of it, that is going to be essential. Retrofitting old buildings, and that's just low-hanging fruit. I think that drive needs to, step up like Fast and Furious 12. And, they need to sort of ramp up and push that in a big way over this year, because only if they push it now will they be able to sort of reach their 2030 target and then the 2050 target. So I think in the short term, those are the main things. I really believe that, we'll be scratching and pulling and we'll get there at the end. But to support private developers is one thing, but to make sure the larger developers implement and get the ball rolling and be a showcase to people like me is essential.
Well, I think we have to wrap up there. I think we could probably keep on talking for a while, but unfortunately, time is something that we don't have at the moment. But thank you very much for joining the show today and for sharing your insights. For those who are watching or listening, feel free to follow Madhav and Zazen Properties throughout social media for further insights. Of course, follow Gulf Intelligence, where we will be publishing this interview and content from this segment as well throughout the next couple of weeks. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Have a good one. Eid Mubarak.
Eid Mubarak.